You can actually put in your flight number and it will tell you Can you not, ma'am? So we are in pajamas today. We are filming a super quick 3-minute Thursday because after I posted my video on Monday, a lot of people wanted to actually see a quick video on how I got over my fear of flying. Now, I will say with a grain of salt because I do not feel that I will ever truly not be somewhat scared of flying. It's kind of just something I've always been afraid of literally since I can remember. And it's actually not so much the fear of like the plane crashing or, you know, something terrible like that. The fear comes from getting sick on the plane and getting stuck. That is pretty much where my anxiety of flying has always stemmed from. And I have had motion sickness my whole life. Like, I can remember being really young and always throwing up on planes, always throwing up in the backseat of cars, like just something I've dealt with my whole life. And so my biggest fear was actually turbulence and not being able to escape, you know, like whereas if you're in a car and you're on a road trip or something and you get sick, you can just get out of the car and stop somewhere, whatever. So that is kind of where it has stemmed from, and I'm sure a lot of people share that same similarity because you feel very trapped and you feel, you know, like you have no control when you're in the plane because you don't. Over time, I have developed these tactics and these things. Now, some of them are medicated, and if you don't want to go that route, obviously you don't have to do that, but this is just some things that I want to share with you guys that I've learned over the years and how it has helped. The first thing is, I just want to tell you guys that back in the day, I used to literally cry every single time the plane was taking off and landing. And this was a horrible thing because it would make me so worked up, and just the elevation changing, you know, because sometimes when you ascend, the plane will kind of go back down a little bit and come back up, and it would make my stomach flip, and I would get so upset about it that I would actually cry the entire time taking off and the entire time coming back down. And I had a really, really bad experience flying to California for my friend's wedding back in, I want to say it was like 2014. There was actually really bad storms over Texas, and the pilot came on and he was like, it's going to be really bad. You know, we need you to sit down. There's not going to be any drink service or food service, whatever. And when I tell you that this plane was like plummeting, it was literally plummeting. Like, people on the plane were screaming. It wasn't even just me. It was other people that were afraid. The flight attendants had to sit down. It was so bad. And I remember I was so upset because I was so sick and I was trapped in my seat, and that whole anxiety made me even more upset. So just to give you guys kind of like a little bit of a background of how I used to deal with flying, so you understand that like it was horrible. Like, I had full-blown meltdowns. At one point I thought for sure I was gonna get arrested during that flight because I was screaming like, I need to get off this plane. It was so embarrassing. It was so bad. And believe me, I did not want to act like that. Like, I was so mortified that I felt this way, but I felt like I didn't have control. There's some things that you can't control, and the first thing is accepting it, and that's just like step number one. So you can't control the turbulence, you can't control the way the pilot is flying, you can't control who you're sitting next to, and there's all these things. So you have to just like take a deep breath and accept that you cannot change these things and go into the flight with that mindset. However, there are some things and some apps that you can use for, number one, meditation if you are an anxious flyer. The first one is Headspace. I do believe that you have to pay for the premium version in order to get access, but they do have free trials and stuff like that. So you can try the Headspace meditation. And there's also a turbulence predictor app. I have two of them. The first one is called Turbulence Forecast, and the second one is called Flying Calmly. The Turbulence Forecaster one is based on turbulence advisories and also pilot reports. So it kind of takes that and it will give you like an interactive map of where they have put, oh, can you guys see that? There we go. It will give you like an interactive map of where you're flying out of based on like where the pilots have reported that there was moderate turbulence. It goes from smooth, light, moderate, severe, extreme. And so you can kind of just like get an idea as far as that one goes. And then in the Flying Calmly app, you can actually type in your flight number and it will show you based on like the projection of your flight, how much turbulence you should be experiencing throughout the duration of the flight. I personally like to know because if I can't can't control the turbulence and I can't control all of those other factors, I want to at least be prepared. I think because my fear stems from getting sick, I also have stopped eating prior to flights, and I just will drink water because I feel like if I have food sitting in my stomach, then I get more nervous that if there is turbulence or unexpected turbulence, then it will make me even more sick. So not really eating, just kind of like chewing gum, drinking water, drinking a lot of water to stay hydrated is also another thing that I've done prior to getting on the plane. As far as medication goes, I have always taken Dramamine, and I take the regular full drowsy formula, and I typically will take 2. You're not really supposed to take more than 2. However, if I happen to get on a flight that is really bumpy and it starts to get bumpy, I will take a 3rd. Don't know if I really recommend that for you guys because it does make me really tired, but I think just like kind of being somewhat out of it takes the edge off of the turbulence, and it also just helps with the motion sickness. Obviously, that's what it's there for. Same with the patches behind my ears. I've also started putting those on an hour prior, and these are just like a generic brand that I got at CVS. They kind of smell minty, and I just put them on my ears. I don't even notice them, and they're supposed to help with the motion sickness side of things. That's what I do as far as supplementation, and of course, obviously, I have like ginger gum, things to settle my stomach, regular gum, the typical things that I've shown you guys in my travel bags, but that's kind of like an as-needed basis. The third thing that I recommend is to get actually a window seat and sit over the wings. 2 reasons. Number 1, and this is just from my personal experience, a lot of people think that the aisle seat is more like, you know, less claustrophobic because you're not like crammed into the corner, which I agree with. However, if you do hit turbulence, it's really hard for you to fixate your eyes on something that's not moving. This actually happened to me on my flight to Atlanta a couple trips back, and I got even more sick than I usually do because I was kind of panicking trying to like get my eyes to focus, and I couldn't. So I figured that if you sit in the window seat over the wings, because sitting over the wings is the most smooth part of the plane, you can actually look out if you're able to see the ground from where you're flying, and you can just look at the parts of the earth that are not moving, and so you don't focus on the plane bouncing around while you're inside of it. Another thing to tag along with that actually is if the turbulence gets really bumpy, it's also helpful to move around in your seat. So I just kind of will like adjust myself in my seat like this. This was something I read a long time ago. I think because if you're stationary and everything is moving, it triggers the things inside your ears to think that it's really a lot worse than it is. If you're moving when the plane is moving, it kind of like, I don't know, aligns, I guess. I'm not sure, that might be a total myth, but I do it as well. If it starts to get really bumpy for a long period of time, I'll just kind of adjust myself in my seat, like kind of sit up and down, get something out of my bag, and just try to like, you know, move as the plane is moving. Another thing too, and I know this kind of goes without saying, and it kind of seems silly for me to say it, but trying to stay as relaxed as possible, whether that's through deep breathing, the meditation, whatever you choose to do, it's gonna help tremendously. Because when I used to hit turbulence and when the plane would kind of like drop, I would like death grip the seat and get so tense that it actually made it a lot worse. I've learned now that kind of just like staying relaxed in my body helps a ton, and it just like, if you kind of can fake it till you make it, that does actually help, at least for me anyway, because I know that if I start focusing on the turbulence and focusing on like being nervous, I tend to get really tense and like start grabbing things really hard, and it just makes it a lot worse than if you just like relax. On my last flight going to Atlanta to Moline, we actually hit really bad turbulence the entire time down, and the guy next to me was like, whoa, like it was pretty bad. And instead of like panicking and just sitting there, I actually turned to him and like was kind of talking to him and like making a joke out of it. And I was like, I'm so glad that you did not know me like 4 years ago and you were sitting next to me, because you would have hated your life. And we were kind of just like joking around. Now, obviously this is going to be another personal preference and dependent upon your finances and how much first class actually is. But I will say that my favorite way to travel, obviously, is first class. And that is because, number 1, you have more room in your seat. Number 2, you're closer to the bathrooms. Number 3, you get more attention from the flight attendants, and I personally like to watch the flight attendants because I feel like if they're not nervous and they're just walking around doing their own thing, then I feel more calm, and I know that like if they're not worried, then I don't need to be worried. So it's kind of like a combination of things, and also I just feel like you have more room to breathe in first class. So that's just something that if I can do, I will always do it. A lot of times with Delta, which is probably my favorite airline to fly, with Delta you can upgrade like last minute if they have seats available, and it's usually usually like way cheaper than actually purchasing a first class ticket from the beginning. I always recommend purchasing the regular ticket, and then if you can, the 24 hours before your flight, or even sometimes I've done it like last minute when there's open first class seats, I'll upgrade for like $60. It kind of just depends on what they have available, obviously the flight that you're on, but if I can, I will always choose first class over regular boarding, just because it's just a lot more comfortable of an experience, especially if you are an anxious flyer. It's just better overall to feel as comfortable as possible. I do want to give a little shout out to my friend Phil, because he is a pilot. I've known him since I used to go to CrossFit Hype. He was one of my training partners there, and I have talked a lot with him about flying and what I'm scared about, and you know, he has told me over and over again that the turbulence actually is not like a bad thing. It's really, really common and just kind of like you're hitting a speed bump. It's way less severe than it feels like when you're in the plane. And so he's just kind of like talking with him about that after I, you know, shared with him how terrified I was of flying. He like showed me a lot of videos of him actually flying the plane and how turbulence is like the least of their concerns when they're actually flying the planes. The most likely chance of you getting turbulence is going to be ascending and descending to your destination, and then of course if you are getting close to mountains or any type of like high city areas where there's a lot of heat rising. So the other suggestion for that he did tell me was to try to book a really early morning flight and an evening flight, just because the sun is not warming the winds as it is during the day when there's a lot more heat, and that's pretty much what causes turbulence. I always like to do the 6 a.m. flights. I have found that 6 a.m. flights are a lot less turbulent and just they run smoother overall because it's the first flight usually out of the airport. So that is kind of my top tips for flying, what I personally do now. And I think going into it with the mindset that you're going to be okay is, like, as silly as that sounds, it really is like mind over matter, and you have to tell yourself that. And I know that, you know, anxiety is not something that you can just flip on and off, but you can do things to help it. This is just kind of what I've learned, and now that I've been traveling way more than I ever have in my entire life, it has helped so much over the last couple of months, and hopefully will continue to help. And I will say that if it makes you guys feel any better, I've had like one kind of bad experience with turbulence over the past, like, 12 flights I've taken in the last 2 months. So just, you know, remember that the chance of you having a smooth flight is obviously going to be a lot greater than the chance of you having a horrible flight. And same with anything bad happening. The chance of anything bad happening on a plane is like so small nowadays. So hope that makes you guys feel better, and I hope that gives you some ideas. As always, leave me your comments or anything that you have any questions about in the comments section below, and I'll see you guys in my next video.